I had an opportunity to meet one of the most important public school whistleblowers of our era. 20 years ago, he walked away from the teaching profession for good. This was no ordinary teacher. This was a 30-year public school veteran, so accomplished within the teaching profession, he even won the New York City and New York State Teacher of the Year awards back to back. Why would someone so successful in a profession want to speak so boldly against it? I had to hear his story.
I started out being picked, I think the year was 1989. It's New York City Teacher of the Year. My kids had written this incredible record, really incredible, which I had very little to do with. I just took my boot off the back of their necks and sort of imitated the best homeschoolers, at least in my opinion. So in my acceptance speech, which has been reprinted about 1,700 times all over the world, I tried to tell the audience who didn't want to hear it exactly what it was that I was teaching. It had nothing to do with English, had a lot to do with certain attitudes.
What was the reaction?
The reaction was dead silence. Nobody said anything, nobody clapped, nobody booed. Interesting reaction.
John Gatto teaches 8th graders. Though he's been teaching in New York City schools for 26 years, he disdains grades, tests, and conventional ways of teaching. He'd rather not teach in the classroom, but the school requires him to 4 days a week.
Confining people in rooms and monitoring every minute of their lives in those rooms couldn't possibly fit into any definition of education that's come from any corner of the world. None. So let's very quickly review what these might be. I don't teach the kids that education's bad. I say that schooling's bad.
We spent a long time studying the great people who had never gone to school and the great Americans who had never gone to school. George Washington had 2 years, period. He had no more time to waste. Thomas Jefferson had 0. They had no schooling. They had great educations because they were talking to real people from the time they were small. They were being given, Jefferson was in charge of a 2,500-acre plantation with 250 employees when he was 12 years old.
John Taylor Gatto contrasted the successful education of our founding fathers with what is happening in the schools today.
You're stealing these kids and confining them for 12 years, and the kids have to be put in a rigid class system where the classes are encouraged not to cooperate with one another.
I was trying to get the students through their parents, stay after school, let's do some makeup. And I won over a lot of parents that way because they could see that I cared about their child. I wanted them to learn. But then there was resistance started by some other parents.
R.C. Murray is another teacher who became frustrated with what passes for education in the public schools. His experiences inspired him to write his book, Legally Stupid.
The problem was the ones who refused to do what I was asking them to do, actually read and actually write. The system had always set it up so that the teacher was expected to read to the students in the classroom, all the way through high school. And I thought, well, this is not daycare. I don't need to be reading stories to seniors. A teacher was angrily making copies of something because she had to give a test to a student that had a label on him that said he was a non-reader. And this was a reading test. So for the reading test, she had to read to the student, then she had to write down his responses verbally because he wasn't expected to write either. It is a waste of time, and yet this child will get all the way through the school system saying that he had English 1, English 2, English 3, English 4, and he's supposed to be ready for college.
A high percentage of the kids that come to us from public school, as high as 70%,
have to take some form of remediation when they get to us. In other words, they got a high school education, they want to go to college, but they're not ready. And the big concern, particularly in Florida, is passing a certain test that you have to pass every year. And if enough students don't pass it, the school itself is graded as an A, B, C, or D school. If you are not an A school, you're in big trouble, you lose funding and all this kind of thing. So teaching the test becomes the issue, as opposed to teaching the children.
They were supposed to do writing assignments in what is called group learning. Mixed ability grouping is what they call it. They put one in motivated child, they call it accelerated gifted child now. They put that one student in a group with 3 or 4, call them diverse learners, which means that they're supposed to, their learning style says that they don't learn the same way everybody else does, but really they're unmotivated students. And they put them in a group setting, give them an assignment. The accelerated gifted student will actually do all the work, but everybody gets a grade, the same grade.
The way public education is structured, it's almost impossible to satisfy that goal of career ready or college ready. Why should you graduate from high school not ready for either? That's just not right.
Now when you walk through a high school or elementary school, either one, you will see pictures all over the place, and artwork and paper dolls. 40 years ago, you would see essays, you would see reports all on bulletin boards with the big A+. You know, this was what was championed back then. Learn to express yourself in writing. Not anymore.
If you have a child to raise right now, you don't want to use your child as the tool to reform the school system and then have them get an indoctrination instead of an education.
If the schools have one job, and we would assume teaching to read and write would be its main job, why would it become so bad at it? Well, there's one place to visit that can explain just that. Neil McCluskey is the Associate Director of the Center for Educational Freedom at the Cato Institute, a non-partisan think tank in DC. He wrote the book Feds in the Classroom, How Big Government Corrupts, Cripples, and Compromises American Education.
It's a major error when people are not happy with what the Department of Education does, and they say, well, what I've got to do is I have to try and change this thing, because it's almost impossible to change it. Every child is going to get the exact same thing, and that's what this department is trying to do nationally. But you need that specialization because all kids are different, all parents are different. Government education doesn't have competitors. The Department of Education doesn't have any competitors. Everything that's done is for generally the benefit of the politicians, first and foremost, and that usually means the most powerful special interests, like the teachers' unions and the administrators. Those people who are most motivated to be in the politics because it's their livelihood that's at stake, and who can most easily organize to do that.
No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice!
These children need 101. 10 to 1 is good, 37 to 1 is no. Smaller class sizes. Smaller class sizes.
We're doing this for the kids. The unions are the people who brought us a weekend and an 8-hour workday. If we don't do this now, our children will not have a weekend. This is for the kids.
Most teachers say they're doing it for the kids and not for the money, but then they always protest for two things: fewer kids and more money. Parents need to be aware that many teachers in America are members of liberal unions that clearly despise conservative and Christian values.
Why are these conservative and right-wing picking on NEA and its affiliates? NEA and its affiliates have been singled out because they are the most effective unions in the United States. And they are the nation's leading advocates for public education and the type of liberal social and economic agenda that these groups find unacceptable.
Do you still think that the teachers' unions are fighting for the kids?
It is not because we care about children, and it is not because we have a vision of a great public school for every child. NEA and its affiliates are effective advocates because we have power.
Power and money. That's what Washington is all about. They have so much of it, but it never seems enough.
But it's also true that fixing our schools will cost some money. Recruiting and rewarding the best teachers costs money. Making it possible for families to send their kids to college costs money. Money, money, money.
You have to pay for this. So for someone to consume private education or to homeschool, they have to say, I'm going to give up on my $12,000, $13,000 a year that are paid in taxes for my kid. I'm going to give up that free education, free in that it's already paid for because you have no choice, and then I'm going to pay twice for it.
And on top of that, we can't even use the facilities we pay for. Don't believe me?
After school, anyone's welcome here, but for liability purposes...
Oh, I'm watching. It's okay.
It's just, I mean...
We're not concerned about liabilities. Our kids will be okay.
I'm sure, but...
We're going to use this park because they're homeschoolers. We pay for the park.
I mean, if you had school kids here, you really
Well, my kids are school kids too.
Yeah, okay.
Thomas Jefferson said that to compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical.
For a long time, there was a pretty big difference between Republicans and Democrats.
The budget plan I submit to you on February 8th will realize major savings by dismantling the Departments of Energy and Education.
As recently as 1996, the Republican Party was still saying in their platform, the Department of Education is unconstitutional and needs to be eliminated.
The federal government's involvement in government schools is totally unconstitutional, totally beyond the purview of the federal government. And even when the states are in charge, they have permitted horrible things to go forward. They are truly indoctrination academies.
During the Nixon administration, Howard Phillips headed 2 federal agencies, one of which he was appointed explicitly to dismantle.
The government schools are doing their best to train future generations to be servants of the state, to adopt the ideology of dependence. If our intention is to honor God and His Son, we must remove our children from the government schools. The family is the cornerstone of a just society. And for the family to be a strong institution, mom and dad have to play the leading role in the education of their children.
If you meet someone who's a public school educator, what's your exhortation to them as much as you can to get them to get their kids out of the schools?
Well, do you want your children to become adults believing the things that you believe, or do you want them instead to accept beliefs which are antithetical to your own and which manifest disrespect for your culture, for your history, for your beliefs, for your faith? I mean, do you want your children to belong to you or to the state?